Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We're hoping you let us know where you think we got it right and where we completely botched it, which you can do by visiting unsilentpodcast.com or our other social channels. So let's get into it. What are we talking about today, Brian?
Well, I don't think we could explain to anybody in the future what this moment is like if we didn't talk about our reliance on people not crossing lines that we've deemed uncrossable.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've said or thought or heard somebody say they wouldn't do that,
Right.
and then boom, what do you know? They do that. So, for example, you and I were talking just a couple minutes ago. If you would have told us in 2008,
Right.
or 2010, or 2014, probably,
Right.
there'll come a time where a state will take the front running candidate for a political party off the ballot. Like,
Right.
they wouldn't do that. Like, okay,
No.
I get they won't like him. Every election, somebody's pissed. They're stuck with a guy for 4 years they didn't like, whatever.
Right.
But they wouldn't actually take him off the ballot.
Right.
You couldn't do that.
No.
Well, we've seen that. If you would have told me in those same years, 2000, 2008, 2014, in your lifetime, people are gonna choose at the age of 7 or 12 that they're the opposite gender, and they will cut off their breasts or their penis or whatever,
Right.
and this will be not only socially acceptable but pushed as and celebrated.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if you don't get on board, you're the weirdo. I would
Yeah.
be like, no way.
No, it's
there's
impossible.
no way that's gonna happen.
Right.
And I think much of people in general, you and I are talking about this, so I guess we're kind of an exception here, but much of the reason people are not interested in having conversations is because they're just kind of relying on this. They wouldn't do that.
Right.
And they're
They
just
think
hoping
it'll blow over.
it'll just peter itself out.
Yeah.
They wouldn't cross a line that's that bad,
Right.
but it's the clip at which we're crossing lines that are that bad is the frequencies and the severity speeding up.
It is, and the reason for that, I think, is that the hyperbole around the reason for crossing those lines is accelerating as well.
Yeah.
So, every election cycle, we're told this is the most important election of all time, and democracy is on the ballot.
Yeah.
And what in with regard to Trump, the folks in Colorado and the people that are just completely Trump is Hitler kind of thing. That crowd says if Trump wins, it's going to be a dictatorship.
Yeah.
And he's fascist and the end of American freedom is coming. So we were talking last time about when things accelerate to the point where a leader like Lincoln takes unconstitutional action.
Yeah.
Well, that can only be justified in the most extreme circumstances.
Right.
And so therefore these lines that get crossed that you and I are talking about are lines that probably most of those people wouldn't have crossed before, except they believe that it's the end of history if we don't do this crazy extreme thing.
Yeah. I think I remember the time I started voting, my first election I voted in was 92. I was still in high school, but I get to vote because I was, I'm a slow learner. So I was older than most kids most of my class. But I remember standing in line and that was the year Ross Perot ran.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
So
I remember.
I was going to vote for Ross Perot because I was a young, hip 18-year-old. We're going to revolutionize the world or whatever.
Absolutely.
Anyhow, and I remember hearing all those things you said, like this is the most consequential election of our time, and this is the whatever. And it was when they went after Mitt Romney and said he's going to keep black people in chains. And I'm like, this is the most milquetoast. Like this guy. He's asexual almost. Like he's as harmless as they come.
Right.
This guy is the next, he was the next Hitler then because he was the Republican, right?
Yeah.
That's when they lost me. I was like, okay, if you're going after Mitt Romney like that, this is just rhetoric. It's not sincere. It's not genuine.
Yeah.
You just don't like people who don't have your view. So anyone that has a different view, you're going to lump in as this. And that's when that's really honestly, that's kind of when they started to lose me. Like,
sure.
When I was young, I was, again, my first election, I was going to vote for H. Ross Perot because he was something new, and I was kind of tired of the old.
And he had great charts.
Yeah, and the giant sucking sound and all that,
I remember the daft days.
But if you look at like how my brain worked and how I thought things should be, I was probably more of a Democrat for sure than a Republican. And as I got older, I probably was more libertarian.
Yep.
And now, by modern standards, I'm the ultra MAGA extremist Republican. And that's the category I'm in now. And by the way, I don't think my views have changed one bit.
Right. Yeah.
I think that I still have. I think I have stayed pretty steadfast. There's probably a few things I've changed my mind on.
Sure.
But more or less, I don't think I've changed all that much. But every one of these things has been hyperbolic. Now, at the same time, in recent years, though, it's kind of the opposite. It's not hyperbole. It's like, wait, they wouldn't do that.
Right.
They wouldn't take away your kid from they wouldn't take a kid away from the parents for not supporting a sex change operation when they're 9.
Right. Yeah.
They wouldn't do that.
That's impossible. Yeah.
Well, and here
it is.
It's here. It's not. This is not hyperbole.
Yep.
This is a real live law in at least one state I know of, California.
Yep.
And there might be others. I don't know. But they literally would take a child away from the parents. If the parents say, no, the best thing for my child is to not have their penis cut off, but to grow out of this phase or wait until they're an adult to make a decision, then you cannot have the child must be taken away.
Yeah.
And there's these sacred lines that, like, this relationship, the child's relationship with the state is more important than the child's relationship with the parent.
Right.
That's a line that just there's, again, 6 years ago, there's no way they would do that. Right. I would say that. But now I think we are, the number of us counting on that is diminishing.
Yeah.
But there's still, I don't know, what do you think? 70, 80% of people probably are just like, okay, this is going to blow over. They'll get tired of it. They wouldn't cross certain lines. Yeah, these guys are arguing over petty stuff. It's getting a little more serious, but there's certain things they just wouldn't cross.
Well, I think the United States in particular is a very aspirational country. We couldn't have come as far as we have and, create the greatest economy or, the greatest
most
country.
Oppressive, Dave. You said most oppressive.
Oh, most oppressive. Yeah. Wrong word.
Greatest economy.
Better let the memory hole people take that segment and just put it down where it needs to be. But as an aspirational people, we like to believe that we can do anything. Reagan ran on the city on the hill, and all of these types of things. So we like to believe that things are going to get better. Every Republican, actually, probably every Democrat says America's best days are still ahead, while at the same time, doing things to prevent that from being the case.
Yeah. They say that the best days are ahead because they're going to turn everything completely upside down,
right?
And,
because they're going to take control of it,
revolutionize everything. Yeah. Right. So of course they have to be better at it. Yeah.
Well, and so I think what happens then is in pursuit of whatever agenda there's a continual incremental eroding of the basic fabric of our society. And what's happening now is that's accelerating. Yeah. It's accelerating faster than it was before. I mean, so, if you go back to 1972, the idea behind abortion was, well, it's going to be a safe and rare, it wasn't going to be a big thing. It's like, let's let this happen, and that it's not going to happen very much. Well, and then from there it accelerated.
Yeah.
And the philosophy behind it, the sort of the sexual freedom behind that accelerated.
Right.
Well, and now we're at a point where, as we're talking about, we can play fast and loose with scientific facts, such as there's no such thing as a sex change. It never has been.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not scientifically possible. Now, if I asked somebody one time, at one of the major college campuses, said, what if I came to your college campus and they said, men are only men, or something like that? Well, you'd be escorted off by campus security
that's right.
that kind of heretical thing you would be saying there. But it's a scientific fact.
Yeah.
And so, and I think
I've not heard of a chromosome transfusion.
Yeah, I don't think
there's no such thing as a chromosome
to my knowledge, that's
transfusion yet.
Outside of sciences and technology.
Not quite there. We're working on it, but not quite there yet.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that'll happen someday, but I don't know. But who needs it when we can just proclaim it by fiat, by saying that we're going to wave the little magic wand and it's going to happen. So this acceleration when that happens, and what used to be outrageous is no longer outrageous, then the next greater outrageous thing becomes plausible.
Yeah.
And then it's not just plausible, it becomes, yes, we're going to do this. And then it becomes not just we're going to do this and it's plausible. If you don't accept it, then you're the wacko.
Yeah, there is I had some, I don't have it in front of me, but there is kind of a pathway from it's acceptable to the gap between acceptable to celebrated. There's like 4 or 5 steps in there,
right?
And these things do they graduate to the next step. So it's tolerated, and then maybe it's acceptable, and then it's common, and then it's expected, and then or celebrated and expected. And if you're not in lockstep with where we're at on these things, like you're the problem,
exactly.
And you're the rube for sticking with the old way, like you're archaic thinking. Thanks, Gramps. Go over there and shut up and just go there and bide your time until you keel over for us young smart people to come and take things over. But there's real consequences for this. Like the border is a great example. Yeah. Like I heard of some bureaucrat in some agency like 7 years ago, 5 years ago, whenever it was. So this would have been 2018 to 2016, somewhere in there, saying. Like if we had 4,000 people a day coming over the border, like we would be overwhelmed, right? And then we hit 14,000 yesterday or something like that. Exactly. And so those kinds of things, like, well, if 4,000 is where we're overwhelmed, like they wouldn't let it get past like 2,500, right? Exactly. And even 2,500, you start doing the math. I'm like, well, that's quite a few people a year, and now we're at these staggering numbers, and the percentage of people, like you and I have talked before, like the percentage of people that clearly don't like us and clearly would do very harmful things. It's probably in the hundreds or maybe even thousands now.
Probably, yeah.
And the amount of damage they could do is just unimaginable. Yeah. And these are the kind of things we go, well, they wouldn't let that happen.
Right.
But they are.
Yeah.
And not only is it acceptable, it's to be celebrated.
Right.
And if you're not on the side of you better be celebrating it. So it's not just that the bad things are happening. It's not just happening that they're the scale they're happening. Right. It's not just the big consequences are there. It's if you speak up, you are the problem,
right?
And so it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Like we're gonna harm you with the thing that is bad, and then we're gonna also harm you if you don't get on board and celebrate us for doing this to you. It's kind of a diabolical thing.
Well, it is. It's. I mean, if there's any positive part of that it's self-limiting, because eventually the whole system blows up.
Right.
I mean,
and these people who are all for like these proclaiming themselves as other sexes, like they can't procreate.
Right. Self-limiting.
There is some Darwinism. Ironically, it's kind of Darwinian thing. Yeah, ironically, the ones who believe in Darwin are going to phase themselves out.
Well, part of the problem, I think, too, is that we have a belief that it's normalcy bias. This idea that everything's going to continue along, it's all going to be just fine, even though we change the fundamental underpinnings of everything in our entire society, the freedom that we have, the economic, power that we've got, the standard of living that we've got, all these things will continue along just fine, even if we completely take out all the supports of the system that have made it happen in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's the delusion of the change agent. The change agent thinks that I'm just going to make things better, not realizing that the way things are, the good things, along with the bad, are because of the system that was in place before.
Yeah.
And so that's where it ultimately ends up being self-defeating.
Yeah, and I think that like the topics we get hung up on, like you and I today have talked about the border and the kids with their different gender identity and all that kind of stuff. We lose sight of like the real fundamental stuff, like what made this country great. And I hope that if you and I and people like us are considered the rubes of time, and people 70 years from now are glad guys like you and I aren't around anymore to screw things up. But that's the way they think. Okay, fine, I can wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
I hope they can and the reason I like doing this podcast with you is to talk about this, is explain here's why we thought this way. Like what was great about our country, and one of the things that's slipping away was, even if you and I really disagreed about something, I valued you as a human, and I showed that I valued you as a human by saying, I will fight to the death your ability to say what you want to say, because you have every right to say what you want to say as I do, even though I can't stand what you're saying.
Right, exactly.
That was a way of demonstrating, like in a real, measurable, objective way, that I valued you as a human, which was different than the serfdom we'd all come from. And the different religions had their hierarchy, and our king is going to go kill your king and whatever. We grew out of that, and we said, I can disagree with you and still 100% respect you as a human being and fight to allow you to have your say, because you are equal to me. And that's how we demonstrated that. And now that's not what we have. Now we have a hierarchy of who gets to speak. and we don't talk about this part that's not just, it's not just words,
right?
It's diminishing each other as human beings based on a value that's assessed by this elite group of people, or the whatever system that,
right.
Again, I don't want to get too tinfoil hatty or whatever, but somebody somewhere is deciding who gets to be a full valued person, who gets to be a partially valued person.
Right.
Somebody is deciding, whether it's Mark Zuckerberg or whoever in
right.
Facebook. There's arbiters of who's a whole person and whose point of view is worthy of being heard, right. and who's not. And losing that that's more, it's a bigger deal to me than the border. It's a bigger deal 100%. To me than the transgender thing.
Yeah.
All these things are symptoms of that, or loosely tied to that, but that's a huge thing that I don't think is really, like, I don't know how to explain it. I mean,
if you think about it, it's really, we had a set of values, a shared set of values. So we've talked about it before, where the ACLU supported they hated the Nazis, but they supported their right to express their views.
Yeah.
So there was a shared set of values, that free speech was important, that individual expression was important, that these things, even though we disagree on how that happens, we agree on this, on this basic thing. And what you're talking about then, I think, is we have that is now being undermined for a return to what we left before.
Yeah.
What we left before were kings telling us what to do.
Yeah.
We're kings and royalty and the people with all the money. If you want to do Hunger Games, it's the people in the capital telling the people in the districts what to do.
Yeah.
And having all the benefit. And that's kind of what that's a reversal of what the American experiment has been since the beginning. It was, it's a republic if you can keep it, ma'am. It's a government by the people, for the people, of the people,
right.
As opposed to what we see now are powerful, rich think tanks that all fly in on their private jets and tell us not to drive our cars. And it's the elites and the common people, and you as a common person aren't allowed to have an opinion that differs from the prescribed opinion of the elites. So it really is a reversal back to the age of kings and emperors again.
It's at least a reversal back to I don't know if that's quite back to the Jim Crow era yet or not, but it's heading that direction. So if you look at before the civil rights movement in the 60s, the where we were there, and there were certain parts of the country where people couldn't say, like the utopia I just described, wherever we were all equal. There's parts of the country where that was not the case, based on things like the color of your skin, based on your religion. But there were small pockets. The idea was there, and I think we made measurable progress for many years coming out of slavery and things like that. And then the pockets where that was not the norm really shrank.
Yeah.
And at the apex probably around 2008, 2010. Yeah. And then boom, we like a springboard, we're heading back. Now we're choosing criteria differently than we did. It's not race and religion so much anymore. It is education.
Yeah.
It is socioeconomic for sure.
Yep.
It
is victim status.
Yeah.
Victim
100%.
status.
So we're using different criteria to create the scapegoats and the villains, and the heroes and the victims. But we are regressing, at least since 2008. I'd say we at least regressed back to the early 70s. I mean, It kind of feels like that's kind of the amount we've regressed back to, from this kind of idea where the pockets of that I value you 100%.
Right.
And the pockets where that wasn't the norm were very, very small in very rural parts of the South or whatever, or in, North Idaho, for example. Like there's little pockets, but it was pervasive, in the 20s or 40s or whatever, let's say. And now it's pervasive again. So maybe it has gone back 100 years in like 15 years. I don't know.
Well, it has, because I mean, we call it by different names now.
Yeah.
But the elites have returned us to segregation.
Yep.
I mean, we just had this controversy the other day here, not to be too much about current events, but we've had this controversy the other day about the Boston mayor having different, racial Christmas parties.
Yeah.
So,
and Harvard and Ivy League schools have had different graduation ceremonies for a handful of years
for
now.
Different, exactly. And so, when I grew up and when I learned about the South before civil rights, and, you had a white water fountain and a black water fountain.
And those images are iconic because they showed where we were and where we are. Well,
where we were a little while back, just recently.
Just
recently, we were in a place where that was considered. And, when I grew up and I looked at that, and, I was in a very multiracial school and school district, and what? You mean my friend over here, he wouldn't be able to.
Right.
I thought that was just weird.
Yeah.
I thought it was just bizarre.
Yeah.
And as a country, I mean, not that there was never, during my lifetime, there's always been discrimination.
Yeah.
I'm sure there always will be, but we'd come such a far way from that.
Mm.
But now and now it's not just two races. It's a whole multiplicity of races and identities, and really based on that.
But it really comes down to either you're on the team of the righteous, or you're on the team of the old rubes.
Absolutely, yes.
There's different symptoms, and there's different categories to talk about. But you're either on the left team or the right team on many things. Yeah. And we kind of going back to how we started this whole conversation was we keep telling ourselves this is sacred. They won't push it that far.
They won't get that far.
They won't go that far, and then they do.
They do.
And we're finding ourselves down this like kind of spiraling kind of effect. And again, going back to why you and I are doing this, or at least why I'm doing this, is explaining to folks what this is like.
Yeah.
Because they're inevitably going to say, "Why didn't you say anything?"
Right.
Well, this is one of the most compelling reasons I think people don't say anything is because they're just hunkering down, just waiting for it to blow over and saying. They won't cross this line. Yeah. And like, it reminds me of that saying, like, I can't remember who it was. It was maybe not even a famous person, but, I didn't stand up when they went after the Jews, and I didn't stand up when they went after the Protestants. I didn't stand up when they went after the Catholics. I didn't stand up when they went after the laborers or whatever the saying is. And then when they came for me, there was nobody to stand up for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it kind of feels like that is exactly what's happening again. Like collectively, many of us are staying silent, just waiting for this to blow over.
Right.
Yeah, it's affecting the people in California with their kids. Yeah, it sucks to be them, but thank God it's not here.
Right.
And then pretty soon, boom, it's here.
Well, and that's what we have to. That's the lesson that I think we hope that Kenny G learns from our era is that, and hopefully we have learned or are learning for facing the next things that are coming.
Yeah.
That if this incrementalism that's been, I mean, it really, you can trace it back in our lifetime to what's happened in higher education from like the 60s onward, this incremental idea of changing the centuries long development of human rights being your right to speak, your right to live where you want, freedom of expression, and lots of different. So all of these freedoms, all these basic freedoms began to be incrementally, intellectually dismantled, deconstructed. Deconstructionism, I think they call it. And if we don't at some point recognize that that's happening, and then say, no, this next step, no, we're not going to go along with that. We're going to speak out. We're going to say no. We're going to push back on that. We're going to defund whatever it is that does that. We're going to push back to the elites these days are horrified that parents would want to be involved in their children's schools and the school boards.
Yeah.
They're horrified. I mean, what was it? The FBI had a memo circulating about these potential terrorists that are parents joining school boards. I mean, come on, give me a break.
Well, you're going to be on a list now, Dave.
Oh, Brian, we've been doing this podcast for I'm sure we're on plenty of lists, and there's plenty of people that are,
dissatisfied. It's funny. I think was it Yuri Bezmenov? Was that the guy's name that came over and sat down with like 60 Minutes and like walked them through the plan?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I think it was Bezmenov was his name. I'm probably getting it wrong, but it was something like that. It's a very Russian name.
Yeah.
And he's with like, whatever 60 Minutes or 2020 or whatever it was back then. This is like probably 1984, I'm going to guess, 82, somewhere in there. And he literally gives them the playbook.
Right.
Like he says, and then we're going to go into the schools and we're going to go out to universities and we're going to do this. And so even back then, and I remember seeing this 10 years after it came out, so probably the early 90s.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking like, even that, like, they're not going to do that. Yeah. Stop it. Get out of here.
Yep.
And if you look back now, 40 years later, there is not a single thing that he mentioned that's not, I can't point to and say, I see it there. I've seen it there. This is happening over there.
Yeah.
Even when they tell us explicitly, even when like one of my favorite things I've heard in the last few months is a friend of mine was, I'm going to get the story wrong because I'm relaying a story he told me. But it was like his child's friend or his child's boyfriend or something like that. They were having a conversation about this stuff, like the Great Reset and whatever.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And talking about like, well, that here the plan is for you to eat bugs and not be able to travel on airplanes and stuff like that. And the kid was like, you're crazy. Where do you get this information? And the guy goes, well, it's from the book they wrote. And he was arguing over this Great Reset thing. He's saying the Great Reset, that's a myth. That's a you're crazy. And then the guy says, well, you should read the book. And like they write the stuff out. And the guy goes, well, fine. What's the book called? It's called the Great Reset.
Yeah.
He's like, wait, what? They were literally like, they say this stuff. Right. You're going to eat bugs. No, they don't mean we're going to eat bugs. Come on, they don't.
The silent part is being said out.
We're not going to have beef anymore.
Yeah.
They don't mean they're going to have beef anymore. And then you look over in the Netherlands or whatever, and they've like outlawed cattle, or they killed 30 million cattle, whatever. There's so much stuff like this. It's hard to keep track of. And you go from they don't mean that to like it used to be a few years, and now it's like 3 weeks.
Right. Yeah.
The thing in the Netherlands was just a few months ago.
The pace. Well, yeah. And in Berlin, they just had a bunch of farmers, Phil marching on Berlin because of the new environmental regulations, which are for our own good in theory. But no, I'm sorry, you can't eat, these are unapproved vegetables. These are unapproved animals, And it serves dual purpose to both control and put the ability of the elites to forward an agenda that's an unnatural, doesn't take into account how human beings really are.
Right.
And that's part of the problem. I mean, I'm all for positive change.
Yeah.
Positive change is a great thing. I'm a tech guy. I love tech, but it can be used positively or negatively.
Right.
And what's happening now really does go back to that model of control and controllers, or controlled and controllers.
Yeah.
And and America, of course, is the biggest impediment to that because we've had the most free society in the history of the world.
Right.
But anymore, we've become so beat up by the barrage of daily, what you think is normal, Brian, is absolutely abnormal. It always has been abnormal. And if you believe it, you're a bigot and a racist and all these different things.
Or just not smart enough to keep up with how things should be.
To keep up with the plan.
Yeah. Thanks, exactly. You're archaic. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Like, so we're at the end of the year as we're recording this now. It's December 2023. For Kenny G, I don't know if this is a thing when you're live, but for our generation at our time, it's sometimes a time for prognostication. It's sometimes a time for goal setting and like, hey, next year we're going to really do this or that.
Right.
What are things that you think will that we're currently saying right now they wouldn't do that over the next couple of years we'll be saying, holy shit, they're really doing that?
Well, it seems that I think you have to look at the impediments to centralized control and say what impediments still exist to centralized control. Mm-hmm. So why do the elites get so exercised about parents? Well, because the fundamental unit of society is the family, and the parents are at the head of that. Mm-hmm. So therefore, that power structure is at odds with the elite control of everything that happens. So I think we can then therefore extrapolate from that. It would be logical for them to attempt to roll back more and more parent rights, more and more parent control over education, over nutrition, over transportation.
They're definitely fighting school choice. There's no question about that. They definitely want people to go to school where they want them to go to school.
Right.
No question about that.
And it's all under the guise of fairness. It's all under the guise of equity. Yeah. It's all under the guise of making sure that we have a more integrated society, but it's really disintegrated society. So I think parental rights will continue to be pushed at and pushed harder at, especially now. I think it's a battlefield. I think one of the biggest battlefields is parental rights right now.
Yeah.
And therefore, as people push back and say, no, you're not going to tell my kid this. You're not going to show my kid pornography in 5th grade, what I consider pornography. You're not going to do that. That is going to become a more heavy battleground.
Along those lines, with that specifically, I as you were talking, I was just picturing the videos I've seen of people at school boards reading the books to the school board that are in the library. Right. And what struck me as you were saying that is as I'm playing those videos in my mind, it covers all races, all genders, all ethnicities, all religions. Yeah. This is like the one thing that, the last one I saw was a pretty good sized black man. Yeah. The one before that I saw was a petite white woman. The one before that I saw was like a guy from India or something like that. It covers everyone.
Yeah.
everyone is united on this.
Yes.
We will decide when our kids learn about sex. We
Exactly.
We will decide what our kids learn about sex. We will decide what is decent and indecent as it relates to sex with our kids. This is a unifying thing. I think you have to be right, because if they can't break that, then they really have nothing, right?
Exactly, and that's why I think they're not gonna give up ground, though. They won't give up ground on that. They will push harder and harder on that, and that's why you saw.
So what's the part you think that you'll be looking back and say, man, a year ago I thought they wouldn't do that, but then
I wouldn't be surprised if we saw them actually taking legal action against parents that are. I mean, they've tried to do that. There's been people arrested,
sure,
but I wouldn't be surprised to see an acceleration of legal action against parents taking their kids away from them for speaking out at school board meetings. This type of thing. That seems to be because. Don't mess with Mama Bear, right? I mean, there's nothing more fierce than a mother who thinks her kid's in trouble. So that seems to me to be a big
I have a couple. The one that I remember the first time I heard about this was I was probably like 12 years old, and I didn't really get it at the time.
Right.
I heard about cashless society my whole life. I'm like, okay, well, first of all, I didn't understand well, I understand the consequences of it then. Like, I heard adults talk about why it was bad when I was like, 10 or 12 or whatever. I didn't really got it. I'm like, who cares? You don't have to carry cash. Right. Like, what's the big deal? And then I remember like a year ago, I watched this video of this guy again in Europe with he's like Klaus Schwab, where you couldn't create a better villain. This guy is like he weighs like 400 pounds and he's got the Buddy Holly glasses on. And he's like, well, the $100 bill that's spent today, we have no idea where it was spent yesterday. Right. Like, why do you give a shit? Like, why do you care, right?
Exactly.
And again, so even a year ago when I saw that video going, they won't push this. They won't do that. But I don't see a path where they won't do that.
Sure.
Because if you can turn off somebody's bank account, unless they're in a like off grid somewhere like deep in the woods in Nevada or Arizona or Utah or some, Alaska, like they got to be pretty deep to not be affected by that.
Right.
You capture everyone.
They're calling it central bank digital currency.
Right.
One of the things that's a great threat to central control are things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, because they don't have government imprimatur on them.
Well, Vanguard just in BlackRock, they're overcoming that.
Yeah. Well,
along with the help of our legislators, they're overcoming that.
But maybe Tennessee will be able to take care of that for them. But
CBDCs is a thing that like I not very long ago I was pretty staunchly like they won't really push that. Like, what kind of freedom can you have if you don't have freedom of like buying things without the government knowing? And I had no doubt that.
And of course, along those same lines, what can you buy without them knowing? Where can you go without them going? Yeah. So the idea of
or without them granting permission.
Or yes, exactly. So if you've got your car and they've got an off switch and they don't want you to go to that rally and they could turn it off because they're tracking your miles to tax you on your miles anyway, then there's another restriction of freedom. And the question is for each of these things, which one is going to be the Boston Tea Party experience?
Yeah.
Because, what the whole, people read about today and a few pennies basically caused that tipping point to happen. I mean, hardly anything at all. I mean, I get taxed more on this bottle of water than, a ton of tea in 1775. But it's hard to predict which one of those things is really
straw that broke the camel's back.
Straw that broke the camel's back. And that's where both sides underestimate the people that are pushing it. I could push a little bit further. I could push a little bit further. And then there reaches a point that maybe nobody can predict that it's just
I think for sure the thing that if there is ever a fuse ignited, it would likely not be a big thing like you and I are talking about. It would probably be some insignificant thing you and I would not see coming.
Exactly.
What other big things do you think there will be that you'll look back on in 10 years and go, there was a point where I thought they would never do that, and then all of a sudden, boom, they did it.
Well, I think that I mean, we're already part of the way towards, I mean, you look at your basics, you look at your transportation, your economy, your housing.
Mm-hmm.
So the controlling of your natural resources, especially for people that live like I do out in a rural area.
Yeah.
If they decide, well, no, the water that's under your land is not your water, it's our water. And we're going to regulate how much of that you can take out of the land.
Yeah.
So the controlling of all the natural resources to then force people to live in the cities, in the big cities.
Right.
I think that's a significant one, making it harder and harder and harder for people to live
a rural lifestyle,
or even a suburban lifestyle.
Yeah.
You know, it's much more efficient for the government if we're all in big, mega large.
Yeah, I mean, you have to go door to door to weld the doors closed on houses where,
right.
like in there when there's COVID in Wuhan, you can
right.
if they're in an apartment building, you just weld one door.
Exactly.
You got 1,000 people.
Turn off the elevator, and everybody from the top can't get to the bottom.
We learned that in 2020, I think.
Yeah.
Exactly. The next one that comes to mind for me is. Which again, going back to 1986 or 88, 84, whatever, when RoboCop came out, I remember kind of thinking, that's kind of quaint. That's kind of a cool story, whatever. They didn't really do that.
Right.
And now you see the videos of the robot dogs that are police dogs.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, they're really doing this. Like at the same time, they're talking about, how dangerous Tesla is because they're pissed at Elon Musk right now. So everything he touches is like, a nuclear bomb waiting to go off, right? Yep. There was, one person who, when it was pitch black, rode a bicycle completely off a curb in front of a car, a self-driving car,
right.
and the person got hit and maybe killed or hurt really badly, whatever it was, a couple of years ago. That was like the end, because that was around the time he was talking about buying X or Twitter or whatever. Meanwhile, at the same time, they're having that conversation about how dangerous that is.
Right.
And there was a article in was like Newsweek or something like that. We were talking about how what's the Tesla truck? What's it called?
Oh, the Cybertruck.
The Cybertruck.
Yeah.
The Cybertruck. If it hits you, like it hurts.
It'll hurt you. Yeah, because it's got sharp edges.
Way different than the F-150 that'll mow you over. Right.
Exactly.
So anyhow, at the same time, they're critiquing everything about the Cybertruck and Tesla.
Yeah.
Like these robot cyber police dogs that would. What's your defense against that? They're going to turn those loose on you in Central Park, and if you're out at 10:01 p.m. or whatever, like that seems like it's coming down the road.
Well, and Portland already has in Oregon a little robot kind of thing patrolling the streets. There's some small robots. I mean, right now they're kind of cute, kind of Wall-E kind of esque. But
well, these robot dogs I've seen in New York City are not that.
Yeah.
They're and again, I don't know to what degree they're out like patrolling.
Yeah.
But I've absolutely seen videos of them like on the street, and again,
and so along those same lines, extrapolating out from that, of course, drone technology is exploding. I have a little drone that's kind of fun to play with.
Do you have a license for that, Dave?
I don't. In fact, if I fly too high near the base over here, I'd get lots of trouble.
You're going to get an aviation ticket and put your ass in jail.
Oh, my word. But think about it from a surveillance perspective.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if the war in Ukraine is being fought to a great extent by drones. So
right.
At first, Ukraine had an advantage, and now Russia has an advantage in terms of their drones coming and raining death down on people. But can you imagine drones flying all over the city so you can't go anywhere without,
I've seen the videos again in China, which we have aspirations of becoming this, where there was drones and you had to like show a QR code that showed that your vaccine status was correct, your social credit score was correct. And there was like a third category where you had to show this thing and the drone would scan it.
Yeah.
And if it popped red for whatever reason, like green was go, red was not, like the drone would come down and like corral you off to a different path where you like get you back into your approved area.
Yeah.
I don't remember the context of it, but drone surveillance and all that stuff.
Well, and that connects to the social credit score, because that's another one that you think about America. We're freedom loving and we're independent, but the government would love to have all of us with our social credit score. They determine the criteria.
Yeah.
And is Dave approved to do this, to buy this, to go there?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. Well, Dave said something on Facebook the other day. We don't approve of that. So therefore you're fined X amount of money, or your taxes go up, or you're restricted within a 5-mile radius of this spot right here. That's something they'll never do that. But
I think, what's interesting, just kind of to segue to how this is a little bit different now. In previous centuries, for sure, maybe even decades to some degree, when you did that to Davy Crockett and Kit Carson, they just left. They went out to the wilderness, and they just went out and created a life away from all that nonsense and got away from those imbeciles who were trying to control their life and tell them they should live in the cities. And, the debate of city life versus country life is older than our country.
Sure, exactly.
When they would be pushed too far, they just say screw it, and they'd leave, and they would go out in the woods. They live in the woods. You can't really do that anymore. No. Like the areas you could do, like you could live off grid, I suppose. But it's much more limited. Where people are confined, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out differently. I got to imagine that people are not going to be any less resistant to that stuff.
Right.
Those things have been around for centuries.
Right.
But their ability to flee that and like go and just like do their own thing and be left alone, that is dramatically diminished.
Well, that's what you wonder, if there will be actual collective action. Because an individual, it's hard for an individual to resist that. The only way that really gets resisted if there's really collective outrage and collective action, like the Boston Tea Party. If it's like, if people are incrementally drug. No, we're just tracking how fast you drive in your car with the drones. That's all we're doing. We're not doing anything more with that.
Well, there was a thing in England where they were taking that people were like pirating not pirating. They were like destroying the cameras that were like doing emissions testing or something like that for the cars.
Sure, yeah.
What was it with that? Like they were measuring how much exhaust they had or carbon or whatever that nonsense. But there's this like band of pirates going around and knocking all those cameras down.
Yeah.
The human instinct to resist that stuff is pretty strong.
And I think it is that tipping point thing. It's like, it's okay. Now it's not okay.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of how those things happen. But it is one of those things I expect they'll push as far as they can. They'll push as far as we let them.
Yeah.
And that's, hopefully our podcast and our message to the future helps Kenny G recognize that unchanging part of human nature that says we'll put up with it until we won't, and attempt to move the we won't back closer to the point where the outrages begin.
Yeah, unless AI has totally infiltrated the human spirit by the time Kenny G's
then that's the Matrix.
I don't imagine that'll be the case in a couple of generations, but who knows? I got to imagine hearing guys like me and you talk about this kind of stuff. They're going to have some similarities in just relating. I hope that there's some relatability they will see, like what we're talking about now and how this drastic difference in 15 short years. And we said countless times or thought countless times, it would never happen to us.
Right.
and yet here we are.
Well, and it's just because human nature, the thing that we can commit, we don't know what the future is going to look like. We're going to have warp drive and transporters and Star Trek and all that. But what we do know is, in theory at least, there'll be humans in the future.
Yeah.
And humans, humans today, humans 500 years ago, humans 10,000 years ago, but, the technology and the trappings and all that's different. But humans are still humans, and we've always been humans, and we're probably going to always be humans.
Right.
Unless we engineer ourselves out of our base instincts or something. But
yeah, good luck with that. We'll screw that up too. Like
absolutely.
We always have these grand aspirations, like we were talking before about like all these like you mentioned. I think you mentioned Hitler last time. Like have these grand aspirations, these things. But when it comes down to the execution, we always
notch it up. Yeah, exactly right. Well, after World War I, there's supposed to be no more wars because we outlawed that. We've moved beyond that.
Right, for sure. And we did pretty well since then, I think.
Except for a couple years.
The number of people who died since that statement or that collective thought was the number of people who died after that versus before that. I'm going to guess is considerably higher.
Substantially higher. Absolutely.
That's funny.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Happy New Year to you, Dave. And
you too, Brian.
I'm excited about continuing to do this. I got to say, though, looking at 2024, I'm not excited about
No.
I keep reminding myself what we said a few weeks ago was like, it's going to be like going through a divorce.
Yeah.
You're going to say, I'm so glad I did it. It was the best thing that could have happened. No way in hell I wouldn't do that. Do that again.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And I kind of feel like that's what this is heading towards. And yeah, it's scary and it's frustrating, but it's also exciting. Like this is stuff that's going to have to be resolved. And each time we've gone through this, we've come on the other side better collectively.
And that's the aspiration because we have gone through it before.
Yeah, I think that's the thing I keep trying to remind myself is, yes, this sucks.
Yeah.
Yes, it's going to get worse before it gets better, and hopefully, if the trend continues, we'll come out of it better than we went in.
Exactly.
On that positive note, if you want to call it that, don't forget to go to unsilentpodcast.com or go to our Rumble channel. You can check out the videos there. We'd love to hear your perspective, especially on this. Like, what do you think, people listening to this, what do you think the things are that we're going to look back and say, I can't believe they did that after all the times I said they would never do that. Like, what's the thing that you think is going to be coming in the next couple of years that we're going to look back and say, I can't believe they really did that after I thought they would never do that.
Exactly.
Dave and I gave a couple examples. Love to hear what you guys think about that. And love to hear your perspective. Like, tell Kenny G from your perspective the guy who's living in the year 2090, middle-aged person at that time, or Jenny G, if you want to talk to her instead. What is this moment like for you? How are Dave and I mischaracterizing what this is like for you? We'd love to hear your opinion. We'd love to be able to have this just be kind of a chronicle, ongoing chronicle of what this. We all know this is an important moment in history. Yep. We'd love to be able to like articulate what this is like for future generations, so they can kind of get a sense of who we were. And if we're wiped out by nuclear annihilation, they will have some kind of record of what we were like, and hopefully it doesn't come at all. Anyhow, that's it for this week. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.
Do you want to be Unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.